Welcome to the HR Consultant course. This is our first session of this course. Today we will be discussing who HR consultants are and what they do. That is our topic for today. Why would someone need to take a course in HR consulting? What is the point? The fact is, those who are involved in consulting and among HR professionals, even those employed full-time, there are quite a lot of such people. They can earn up to 100% of what they make at their primary job on average. Of course, for some projects they can earn much more, but on average it is about the same as their regular job. And it is an opportunity for those who do not have a full-time job to work remotely as a freelancer on their own schedule and earn as much as they would in a full-time position. So for many, this is a way to gain either freedom or additional income. But for this, you need to know what HR consulting is and how it works. This course has a website and it looks like this. And in case we have not met before, my name is Mike Pritula. I have worked in various companies, industries, fields, and so on, in different positions and projects. I have more than 50 completed projects within the companies I have worked for, including launching various products, developing documents, processes, policies, and so on. And when it comes to HR consulting, probably about 20 projects, if we do not count training, because I have thousands of hours of experience in training. From the very beginning, I guess I was interested in performing some parallel tasks. I had a wide variety of requests, from some elementary, super basic ones to projects that led to significant results. That is the kind of experience I have. In my work, I rely on global best practices. By the way, I will be mentioning many of these companies today because there are HR consulting companies among them. Well, I think it has probably been over 10 years now that I have been studying what HR consulting companies do and what they offer, because I understand that these companies have an R department, research and development, which develops new products and approaches that then make their way into business. So many HR processes and solutions have come to us from consulting. For example, the competency model. It was originally developed in consulting, as was the assessment center. Job grading, it came from consulting, and a lot of employer branding too. All of this came to HR from consulting. And thanks to the world of HR consulting knowledge, the HR industry is evolving. So if you're interested in always being ahead of the curve, ahead of the competition, always look at what new services, solutions, and products consultants are offering. Moving on, in this course, as with all our courses, there will be homework assignments in the field of consulting, the completion of which will allow you to receive our diploma. It will say HR consultant on it. As you can see, our diploma is attractive. We've updated the design. It has become even more appealing. We issue the diploma on a platform. It's a special platform used by over 1,000 companies. And about 1 million diplomas are generated there every month. And our diplomas are created there as well. Your diploma will be among diplomas from companies like Google, Harvard, more specifically Zendesk, Slack, and many other companies. So you'll be in good company. Let's move on. This course consists of 8 sessions. Today, we're getting an overall introduction to consulting. Next, we'll immediately start learning how to work with clients. How to start working with a client, how to develop an action plan strategy, how to implement changes, and we'll cover the main areas of consulting, recruitment, employer branding, onboarding, motivation, engagement, retention, compensation, payroll, benefits, and performance management, development, and training. These are the most popular areas, as research shows the most common consulting requests. So you'll gain knowledge and tools that you can use for clients who may approach you, or clients that you find yourself. Today, we'll also discuss where and how to find these clients. This is our plan for this course. Today, we'll talk in this webinar: why companies hire consultants, what consulting companies are out there, how much do consultants get paid, where to find clients, what typical client requests might there be, which requests should not be considered, how to build your personal brand so that people come to you for consulting, how to form your service package, and we'll look at a study on modern consultants. This will be covered in today's session. That's our plan for today. So let's start with what human resources consulting is and what it's called. The thing is, when you search online for consulting firms, consulting tools, research, or reports, you'll see that there are many different names for what we call human resources consulting. Firstly, they might indeed write human resources consulting or human resource consulting. But it can also be management consulting, and it will have many of the same tools as in human resources consulting. Some call it human capital consulting. Some say human resources advisory. Some say human resources services. Some say human capital, some abbreviate it. For example, I've often heard from Deloitte, that's what they say. I wondered what HCAS stood for. Then I realized human capital advisory services, and maybe human capital solutions, such fancy names they've come up with. So all of these are synonyms for human resources consulting. So when you're looking for information, pay attention to these names as well. Next, let's talk about the consulting market. When you're thinking about something, whether to start or not, interesting or not, you're trying to gauge the level of interest for yourself. For human resources consulting, the level of interest is understanding the market size. So currently, the global consulting market is about $80 billion, and it's expected to surpass $110 billion very soon. It's a pretty solid, serious market, quite large, so it's not something niche. And even if it's not super popular in our country yet, the market is growing globally. We'll see the statistics today, how many percent. So it's a very in-demand field. Next, if we estimate how much this is per person, I wondered what share of the pie you might get. I looked it up and found that on LinkedIn, about 670,000 people are somehow connected to HR consulting. That is, they have the word HR or HR consulting in their profile. So if we're being very rough, it's certainly a very rough estimate. But if we calculate this figure, how much the consulting market volume generates, how many people are employed there, it's about 163,000 per person. By the way, I turned out to be right later because I'll be showing other figures further on. They're pretty close to these. So that's roughly how much it is per person. That's $13,700 a month. I'm not saying you'll earn that much, most likely not nearly that much. Most likely, if you're earning, say, $2,000 a month now as an employee, then you could earn about the same in consulting. Let's move on. Why do companies? The question arises. Consultants, are they in demand? Does anyone actually need them? There are a lot of HR professionals. Why are these consultants needed? Yes, they are hired because there are needs and demands. What can they be hired for? To solve business problems. Often there's a problem they can't solve themselves, so they turn to someone who they think can solve it. Then they turn to the HR as an HR business partner saying, help, we have this problem. We need to solve it. We can't handle it ourselves. Next, they hire to implement various HR products because they lack their own expertise. For example, they say, help us implement branding. We don't know how to do it ourselves. We know about it, but we want someone to do it for us. Sometimes they hire consultants to transfer knowledge and manage internal teams. They say, we have a team. They need help with, for example, managing the company or its leadership. They hire consultants to help automate processes. For example, when I worked in gaming, the company was implementing SuccessFactors, which is a huge system, multifunctional, and they hired consultants who understand it and have already implemented this system in many companies. He has experience. Clearly, the internal team doesn't have such experience, so they hired him. Furthermore, sometimes they just need expertise. There are simply questions that need to be answered. For example, once they called in the company owner so that I could answer questions, they were interested in how to review salaries. What to do when people ask for a higher salary? Because they didn't know. They tried to address it on a case-by-case basis when they had about 50 employees but didn't realize it wasn't working. And they invited me and said, tell us how this works in big companies, what it looks like in general. What should we do? When people come and say, we want a raise? Sometimes consultants are hired simply to serve as extra hands. That is, they're doing something inside the company, for example, running an assessment center, and they don't have enough internal assessors. And there's no time to train their own, so they just look for experienced assessors who can be hired to help the internal team solve some tasks. They may also hire consultants to evaluate candidates. I've been invited several times. So you act as recruiters. Given your expertise in human resources, you're asked to interview another human resources professional. So it turns out that by evaluating another human resources professional, you're helping the company select finalists. That's why companies hire human resources consultants. Most likely something from this might be interesting for you. Let's say you're working with us somewhere now. I recommend you think about what from this list you could do and what from this would be interesting for me to do. Next, what kinds of clients are there? What kinds of clients have I encountered? Often there are startups, they've raised investments, and they have a very short time frame to solve various problems or tasks. Often it's related to their recruiting, meaning they need help building a recruitment process. Often it's related to performance management, meaning they need help implementing OKRs or something similar. And often it's related to culture. That is, the company expects to grow very quickly and wants to recruit the right people and implement a culture. These are the kinds of tasks startups often have. For them, as a rule, everything is always urgent, 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 and they have nothing in place. Why is it urgent? Because the investments they attract usually last for 6 months to a year. That's how a startup works. So they estimate we've raised, you read somewhere in the news, such and such startup has raised $1 million, 2, 5, 10. This money is typically raised with an average calculation for 1 year. That is, it's assumed that the startup will spend this $1 million on people and marketing over a year as a rule. Accordingly, the startup is thinking about how to hire people as quickly as possible within a year, scale the product as quickly as possible, attract more customers, so that in a year we would be a bigger company and could attract the next round of investment. That's why everything here is fast, everything is urgent. And by the way, These are good clients because they won't spend a long time negotiating terms of cooperation with you because they simply don't have time. Next are companies without HR. There are companies that either don't want to or can't hire HR but still have needs. And instead of hiring their own full-time HR, they simply use such external resources as needed for any of these tasks that I described earlier. Next, it could be a large established company. Of course, they'll have the most money because these are companies with budgets in the tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Such a company, its advantage is that it usually knows how and is used to working with consultants. Because they engage these consultants in different areas, they often engage the Big Four for audits, for financial reporting and other processes, and for them to bring in HR consultants as well is in order. So we, with those consultants, those tasks, solve with those consultants, those tasks, they have budgets, they have tasks, so it doesn't cost anything for them. Well, of course, here on the other hand, there may be some kind of tender, long coordination, long negotiations, some bureaucratic fiddles and so on. Well, they have the most money, meaning you can make the most money with them. Well, your clients may be a consulting company that invites you to subcontract. That is, they have bought some services, some consulting, their own people are no longer enough, and they quickly recruit on the market someone who has the expertise to, on behalf of this company, to implement the project. So they say, you'll be working as part of our team, you'll be expected to do this and this and this. These are the basic types of customers. Sometimes it just happens to be individuals. It could be HR, it could be a director, it could be a chief executive officer who needs some sort of personal counseling. That can happen too. But the main types of customers, they are like this. Next, who acts as a customer representative? Who's communicating with you? Sometimes it's the proprietor, and there are pros and cons to that. Pros, because nobody decides but him, he doesn't have to coordinate with anyone. But the disadvantages are that this person, he often has such a very emotional character, explosive character. These are people, entrepreneurs, they can demand a lot, they can change their minds often. So working with them can be very challenging. General manager. On the one hand, he has less authority than the owner, and on some issues, he may have to consult the owner or coordinate. But on the issues of slating charkas, it's of a lesser degree. Plus, a hired person, he is less emotional. He understands that it's all about business, about relationships. That's why in the interaction may be more straightforward. Chief Operating Officer, less often Chief Financial Officer. This is when the issues of building some HR systems are handled by the Chief Operating Officer, often even an HR department reporting to the Chief Operating Officer or just HR staff. Understandably, the Chief Operating Officer himself may lack competence for HR issues, so he engages or HR consultants, and they may even be interested in not having a strong HR director, so that the HR director doesn't take most of the work and go subordinate to the Chief Executive Officer. That is, they benefit from working with consultants. An HR director who lacks some expertise or is short-handed may also work with consultants, and in principle, this is normal. The only thing is that it's pretty rare for an HR director to make a decision on their own. That is, will likely coordinate project budgets with the Chief Executive Officer. Less often, it can be in the role of initiators and in the role of customers, other top managers who have some narrow tasks, and they came up with the idea that it would be cool to implement it in the whole company. For example, technical officer. I mean, the CTO thinks that this is what it would be like to implement OR in the company. He's kind of leading this project, he's lobbying for this project, and he's finding a consultant within this project to help about QRPs. But it will usually be a one-time thing. Here's the client. Next, examples of consults. So there are actually very, very many companies in the world, but there are some companies that you're going to hear more often. And accordingly, when you come across their names, pay attention to them. I'd even recommend visiting the site and seeing what they publish. That is, keep them in your sights. So I guess I prioritized among all the possible ones, primarily those I've heard of, and a few that are considered the biggest. So the first company is Korn Ferry, which acquired another company. There was a company called Hay Group. Then they sold out to Korn Ferry. Next is the company Aon Hewitt. The same thing. There was a company that spun off from Hay, and they were involved in job grading. Hewitt, for example, is known to me for employee engagement issues. Gallup Company also deals with engagement issues to a large extent. Next, here's a very interesting chain. There was a company called SHL. They dealt with competencies. They were bought by a company called CEB, and that company was bought by Gartner, a larger consulting company. Next, Radford Company also deals with compensation. Mercer has many products, including audits and salary market reviews. Deloitte, in my understanding, in my eyes, Deloitte is one of such leaders. I'm very aligned with their approaches. Ernst Young Company. Of course, they're more focused on finance and accounting, but in Ukraine, for example, they have very strong HR expertise. It definitely depends on the country. They're now called PricewaterhouseCoopers PwC. They're also quite strong in principle, but it varies in different markets. Universum Company specializes in employer branding and recruiting. They're strong in Europe, and I always read and share their employer branding research with students. DDI stands for Development Dimensions International. These guys specialize in assessment centers and development plans. Boston Consulting Group is a broader company covering various consulting areas, including HR consulting. Roland Berger is also a consulting company, as is McKinsey. McKinsey, for example, is a very well-known brand. There's a book about McKinsey. I recommend reading it. By the way, it's a great book for HR consultants. And here's another example. Laszlo Bock, former HR director at Google, he worked with McKinsey. Willis Towers Watson. They're usually known for salary market surveys. Accenture, they're very big, very large. A lot of people have worked there. I've worked with people from Accenture. They're quite competent. Bain Company are also consulting firms. A company you probably wouldn't expect to have consulting services is IBM. They produce computers and software, but they also have consulting services. This consulting is more software related. The same goes for Dell. Companies like Infosys, TCS, and Tata. I would even highlight these 5. They're considered the largest in the world, but you probably won't hear much about them here. I think it's because they work with mega corporations with some crazy contracts, probably worth millions or even billions of dollars. We don't have such clients, so you won't hear about them from us. So, most likely, even if you approach them with a $500,000 request, they probably won't be interested in working with you because they're not used to projects of that scale. I mean, I've read about them doing things like ABM, they're building some kind of artificial intelligence, there are complex information cubes, big data, and all sorts of complicated stuff. You'd have to be a huge company to utilize everything IBM has to offer. So these are the kind of consultants we're talking about. Let's move on. Payment options for consultant work. So when you want to work as a consultant, you'll need to decide how you're going to charge. There are several options. The first option is per project. For example, they say, we want you to implement a grading system. You say, okay, $5,000 for instance. That's it, you've agreed and you implement it. Next, it could be just for consultation. We need a consultation or we need 10 consultations. And we need consultations on these issues. You say, okay, you'll need 10 consultations and then you charge for each consultation. Next, it could be for hours worked. So there's a project, you estimate it in hours, roughly, agree that payment will be hourly, and you report on the hours worked as you go along. So you say, here's how many hours. I've had that experience. Of course, the downside is that you need to keep track of all these hours in some form of report. But then I worked 100 hours this month, and based on my rate, you owe me this amount. Here's the report of hours worked. More rarely, I'd even say very rarely, you get paid for a specific business result. They might say, let's have you implement something for us. And if our turnover rate drops, we'll pay you $10,000, say, for every percentage point decrease in turnover. It's quite a risky approach. You don't have as much influence on many internal processes. So be careful when you're offered payment for a specific result. Next, how much do they pay? There are different approaches to payment as well. The first option is to simply look at how much such a person costs in the market as a full-time employee. And accordingly, they calculate how many hours you've worked and simply convert it to an hourly rate. For example, a consultant like you might be worth $2,000 per month in the market. So if we roughly calculate 160 hours, that's $12.50 an hour. So they say, we have a project, let's have you work with us and we'll pay you based on this rate. The second option is without converting from monthly pay, but simply based on market rates. On freelancer sites like Upwork, Fiverr, and many other freelance marketplaces, there are established rates. These are all freelancers, broadly speaking. Of course, you'll find very different rates, but on average, they charge $5 an hour. Accordingly, this is considered an average freelance rate, and you can also set your rate at this level. The third option is based on the rate you decide for yourself. You can say, my hourly consultation fee is $100 or even $200. But then it's expected that they'll get a lot of value from you. These are the options available. Moving on, where and how to find clients. This is the most interesting part, because it's one thing to declare that you're a consultant, it's another to actually have clients. From what consultants themselves say, from my personal experience and from various studies, first and foremost, it's those who have already bought something from you. That is, past employers are generally some of the best clients for consultants because they already know you. They know what you're capable of, what you can do. It's easiest for them. Next are your current acquaintances. That is, people who know you. Friends, colleagues, those who've worked with you, those who work in other companies, some college contacts, childhood contacts. So it's basically your social circle that learns you're doing consulting. Next is networking and word of mouth. When you start meeting people on Facebook, at conferences, people start talking about you. and inquiries start coming from your network, from people you don't know personally or through someone's recommendation. Our social networks, where people see your interesting, cool posts and simply write to you saying, "We see that you do this, and we're interested in solving this particular problem." Specialized freelance marketplaces. They usually exist in every country, often called freelancer, freelancers, and so on. Either these or other platforms that are multiplying more and more. So just Google what freelance marketplaces are available in your country for your field. Also, your active outreach on LinkedIn. Many people who sell services now do direct message outreach. It could be an email newsletter. Then the question is where to get your email database. Ideally, these are people who have subscribed to you in some way. This is called PPC. It's paid advertising. Let's put it that way. For example, on Facebook, Instagram, and Google. That is, when you show your ads, people click, land on your website, and learn about your services this way. And finally, marketing is when someone recommends you, like bloggers or celebrities. They say, "For this kind of issue, I recommend contacting this company." These are the main ways to find clients. Let's move on. What are the typical requests? We're not talking about the type of request, but rather in which areas you might be approached. This is a hint for you about which products are worth developing. I often hear, encounter, and see these requests, so I've somehow managed to compile a list. Implementing job grading is super popular. Few people know how to do it in-house, and many companies need it. Implementing OKR or KPI systems. Employer brand assessment and enhancement. Automating HR processes for building a total reward system. Reducing employee turnover. Implementing coaching or mentoring programs in the company. Developing a bonus system. Conducting surveys. These can include various engagement surveys, satisfaction surveys, loyalty surveys, and surveys about management performance. Developing a competency model. This may also include developing job profiles. Conducting employee evaluations, which could be an assessment center, assistance in organizing performance reviews, conducting HR audits to figure out what's working and what's not working in the company, developing HR strategies, and describing HR process construction, which includes flowcharts, documents, and staff optimization. But these are probably the most typical requests. I didn't include recruitment requests here because recruitment stands a bit apart. Although all consulting is essentially recruitment, these are the kinds of requests companies typically have. What requests would I not recommend considering? Those where there's no clear specification and understanding of the expected outcome. That is, when the client themselves doesn't clearly understand what they want, they might waste your time trying to figure out what they need and end up not buying anything. When all agreements are only verbal, when they don't want to put anything in writing because such agreements can later be violated. When instead of the requested payment, they say, "Let's do a barter deal. We'll give you something. Let's do part in cash, part in stock options." Or, "How about you do it and we'll pay you based on the results?" Yes, if you're okay with it, if you're willing to take the money, fine. But if they're offering this instead of a fixed payment, it means that they probably don't have money, they're reluctant to spend it, and most likely nothing will come of it. Or it happens that someone in the company wants something, HR resists, and they try to break through this resistance by bringing you in. And HR will resist and create obstacles for you. Such collaboration won't be very productive either. It's better not to consider these types of requests. Next, how to build your personal brand. In consulting, since you'll likely be working under your own name, because if you're working for a company, it's a completely different story. If you're working under your own name, you need what's called a personal brand. What is a personal brand? It's important to understand that a personal brand is the product of two components. The first component is your reputation. In other words, what do people say about you? Are you a great HR professional? Are you average? Are you mediocre? Are you weak? Or are you unknown? And reach. That is, how many people know you? And the more people who know that you're a great HR professional, the stronger your brand is. And vice versa. So to build your brand, we can either influence this part of the formula or that part of the formula, or better yet, both. But we can't, for example, only influence one part or the other. It's also important to understand this. Accordingly, to improve your reputation, your expertise, your value, and your content are important. To turn your knowledge into money, I came up with an interesting model called the pyramid, the knowledge monetization pyramid. It looks like this. At its foundation lies your knowledge. If you don't have knowledge to begin with, you won't see any money because you won't be able to do anything. Next, the target audience should know about this knowledge. You need to decide for yourself who your target audience is, who are the people who will pay you money. In order for this audience to learn about you, you must have content that you provide to this audience. You also need a product that the audience can buy. This product needs marketing, that is promotion, and only then comes the payment. Now let's break it down in more detail. Step 1 is all about branding, specifically your personal brand, how to develop it and how to monetize it. Step 1, You need to keep improving your knowledge. You should all regularly read contemporary books, take courses, read ongoing research, participate in various groups, read what opinion leaders are writing, and check out consulting company websites. In essence, knowledge is your main asset, and you need to keep it up to date. You have to maintain it. If you had a machine, you would oil and repair it. If you had land, you would fertilize and plow it. Since knowledge is your main asset, you need to enhance that knowledge too. Step 2. You need to grow your audience. You want to create a situation where many potential clients start to learn about you. To do this, you need to be very active on all kinds of social media platforms. You might even create your own community. You can do this either on Facebook or Telegram, actively participate in other communities, and build trusting relationships with opinion leaders. So how do you do this? I would recommend starting with this. It is probably the first focus. Add 5,000 contacts to your Facebook. That is, add as many as you need to reach 5,000. Facebook does not have big issues with this now. If you are not new to Facebook, you can add several hundred contacts. Of course, you should not overdo it. Add a few dozen contacts per day. There is nothing stopping you from having 5,000 contacts in a few months. All these people will see what you write. Of course, add the right target audience of the desired gender. The situation is more complicated on LinkedIn. There is a 30,000 limit, but you can only add 100 new contacts per week. Sometimes they allow more, depending on your profile level, but it will happen slowly there. Next, there are all kinds of Facebook groups where people post, and you can post your content there. The same goes for Telegram chats. You need to be active there. People should get used to seeing you as someone who is frequently visible and expresses expert opinions. Participating in professional clubs and conferences is also important because that's where you meet people and make new connections. This is a way to increase your reach. Next, I've mentioned the term target audience several times. This means you need to clearly understand who your target audience is, not just who they are, but what their life is like. For this, it's useful to use a tool called the target audience persona, where you describe in detail who they are. It's harder to promote professional services on Instagram. Building your brand on Instagram will take more time because you need to somehow get a lot of people to subscribe to you. Just subscribing to someone won't increase your reach. On Facebook, when you add each other as friends, you see each other's content. On Instagram, if you follow someone but they don't follow you back, they won't see your content. That's why Instagram isn't as effective here. I'd say TikTok is more effective than Instagram. TikTok is more challenging because you need to create video content. It's not easy for everyone, not everyone is used to it, and it's not simple for everyone. Therefore, those who aren't used to these channels. So, here's an example of a target audience for an employer brand. You just adapt this to suit your needs. Next, create content. You should write articles on social media, both personally and in groups when possible, as well as on websites where it's allowed, such as vc.ru, MC Today, and Hub. In other words, look for websites that your target audience reads, which allow guest posts, and write for them. Next, any videos you create. There are now lots of people who gather subscribers thanks to great videos. By the way, speaking of Instagram, I recently saw a case study. There's this woman who lives in some village, and she just films her rural life and interacts with her subscribers, but in a very unique way. Hello, my darlings. How are you all doing? We've got some flowers blooming here. She has hundreds of thousands of subscribers watching her super simple videos. So this kind of content has gone viral. Next is presentations. Presentations for webinars, web conferences, and participating in them. Now, many platforms and websites are interested in hosting webinars. You can participate there. They will promote you as the host of this webinar, and you will gain recognition among your target audience. The same goes for offline conferences. When they happen, it is also cool to get in on those. And courses. If someone somewhere is looking for an instructor, you have the opportunity to become a course teacher. This is also a good chance to promote yourself and your knowledge. Next, create a product. It is very important to offer something. Do not wait for someone to come to you and say, hey, do some grading for us. You need to understand what the audience needs are, what kind of audience you have, what expertise you have, and what results you could deliver. I have pointed out several product examples to you today. You might come up with some unique ones of your own. I would not want you to limit yourself to just the list I have provided, because you might come up with something new. There are people who specialize in a very niche product for a very specific audience. For example, there are people who work exclusively on employer branding. I am an employer brand expert. Some focus solely on employee engagement. Some specialize only in the new generation, these so-called Generation Z. Some focus just on automation, which is not bad because when you specialize in one thing, you have fewer competitors because there are generalist companies. But when you say, I am the person who does grading for everyone, then when someone talks about grading, you are the one they will remember. Next, the product needs to be packaged. That means creating its positioning description, developing a landing page. Luckily, there are many website builders now, preparing a promotion strategy, thinking about how to promote it through free content, and if necessary, bring in producers. There are people who do this. but nowadays people seem to be doing it on their own as well. And for the sixth point, payment, you need to think about how you will receive payments to your card as an individual and pay taxes, or register as a business, pay taxes through it, and for example, receive payments to a card or connect some payment system. These issues also need to be resolved. This is the pyramid for building your consulting business. Now, a few studies. So how much they earn, I promise to show you. Those were my calculations on how much consultants earn worldwide. There will be a link to this study here. Earnings depend on the level of education and work experience. The more experience, the higher the salary. But the minimum is $115,000 a year. That's in the United States of America. Next, this is what HR consulting looks like in the US, as one of the most developed markets. This market is about $23 billion, while the global market today is $80 billion. And as you saw, in 4 years, it will be $110 billion. The average growth of this market in America is 3%. Globally, it's growing faster. That is, more consultants are emerging in developing countries. In the US, just think about it, there are 6,803 companies in the consulting industry. So if you're thinking, well, there are these top 20 leaders that seem untouchable, please remember that besides the top 20, there are thousands of smaller companies that are doing just fine. On average, companies sell $3 to $4 million per year per company. On average, one consultant brings in $29,000 a year for their company and earns about $80,000 a year. This is for one consultant, the very average one. This is what consulting looks like in the US. What's happening in the world? Among trends, the most important one is based on data and analytics, and especially in terms of people's engagement. In other words, in the business world, clients are most interested in engagement because it has the biggest impact on business results, and they want to tie engagement to numbers. Now, homework for those already in our course. Fill out your consulting pyramid, indicate what your most valuable knowledge is that you could continue to offer, specify who the target audience is, and what content this target audience expects to receive. In other words, what they find interesting to read. Specify what product you could package your knowledge into, what specifically to sell. Is it employer brand consulting or something else? Think about how you could communicate information about your product to your target audience and consider how you could receive payment from them. That's the homework for those already in the course. Books I would recommend reading. A book on how brands grow, because as a personal brand consultant, you need to understand the general principles of brand building. The second book, $1 Million Resume, I co-authored with my former colleague. There's a lot in it that overlaps with today's topic. And another great book about how to attract attention online by Michael H. It's very useful. I would recommend reading it. With this, we conclude today's topic on who consulting consultants are. In the second session, we'll talk about how to start working with a client, how to conduct an audit and diagnose the situation. There's a question in the chat. Please tell me, is it better to be a recruiter or an HR consultant? If you have that choice, definitely be a recruiter. In other words, it's easier to become a recruiter and it offers a more guaranteed income. HR consulting, being an HR consultant, that's when you've already worked as an employee, you have certain experience, and you want some freedom and additional income. Here, Victoria writes, I'm a recruiter and I can also consult. Yes, that's exactly what I was about to say. And then after you've worked as a recruiter, you can start consulting on certain issues. By the way, recruiters often advise individuals on career building and job searching. It's a very lucrative thing. They charge $100 for a consultation, helping with resume writing. I was once very interested in this topic. I wrote a book and an article about it. I used to help people write resumes myself a long time ago. At first, I was paid $15, then $50, then I raised it quite a bit, up to $200. I was just improving resumes and people were finding jobs because of it. The topic of resume improvement isn't really my thing. I quickly moved away from it. But I practiced it, explored it, and wrote an article. The book was born. The book originated from an article. The article is called 3 Life Hacks for Resumes. It went viral on the internet. How to get on webinars as a speaker. But here you need to understand which webinars to target. Most often it's about looking at who's conducting open webinars, specifically webinars with multiple speakers. Let me give you an example of how I became a conference speaker. Back then there were conferences. It was a long time ago. I was offered to speak at various conferences. At some point, I told the organizer, I could probably be your speaker as well. They said, well, suggest your topics and write about yourself. I wrote and suggested topics. They replied, okay, this topic is interesting. Prepare your materials. That's how it happened. The same goes for webinars. Look, they're being organized and they want diverse participants. So offer yourself, say, here I am, here's my LinkedIn. Here are the topics I can offer. I'd be interested in being a speaker for you. Because speakers are often in demand. That's all for today. I invite everyone who's with us in the course to join this course. to undergo training in order to develop this HR consulting competency. If you're watching this video on YouTube, pay attention. There's a sponsorship option there. Sign up for sponsorship to support our channel and gain access to all our webinars. So there you have it. I hope you found it interesting. Thank you for your attention. I see we had many participants today. It's great to see your interest. I wish you all a productive evening and see you soon. Goodbye.